ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to go ahead and look over Chapter 5.2. We're going to start on page 103 and go to page 107. And we're going to go ahead and answer these 9 reading questions. So we've already talked about demand, the buyer side of the market. We've talked about supply, the seller side of the market. We've talked a little bit about the price system. And today we're going to talk about how supply and demand and the price system helps guide the market to what's called an equilibrium price, as well as an equilibrium quantity. So let's go ahead and take a look at market equilibrium. So let's start off with number 1. It says, what is market equilibrium? So market equilibrium, if you look on page 103, it has the definition. It's a situation that occurs when the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded for a product are equal at the same price. So it basically is where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded for a product. Market equilibrium is going to have an equilibrium price, and market equilibrium is also going to have an equilibrium quantity. So if you look at figure 5.1, let's look at the demand and supply schedule for tennis shoes. So there you can see a chart. It has the price per pair of tennis shoes. It has the quantity demanded at that price, and it has the quantity supplied at that price. And so what they did is they went ahead and plotted those 2 points right next to the actual chart. And you can see there you have a downward sloping demand curve labeled D1 and an upward sloping supply curve labeled S1 on the same graph. And where that point where the demand curve intersects the supply curve is called market equilibrium. Okay, so for number 2, where is the equilibrium point on a supply and demand curve? It is where the demand curve intersects the supply curve. So if you look on figure 5.1 on the supply and demand graph, you can see that there you have an equilibrium price. Remember, price is always going to be on your y-axis. And here the equilibrium price is $60. And then there's an equilibrium quantity as well. Remember, quantity is always going to be on your x-axis. And the quantity is 90,000. Okay, so important things to remember are, with your supply and demand graphs, price is on your y-axis, quantity is on your x-axis. Where supply meets demand, okay, where the supply curve meets the demand curve, you're going to have a market equilibrium price, and you're going to have a market equilibrium quantity. And that market equilibrium price really is the perfect price, because if price were any higher, people wouldn't buy it. If the price were any lower, suppliers would not supply it. And the market is going to naturally go to this equilibrium point. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at some situations that show how this actually happens. So if you turn the page and go to page 105, we're looking at number 3, what is a surplus? And so on page 105, you can see the definition. It says a surplus exists when the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded at the price offered. So at a surplus, quantity supplied is going to exceed quantity demanded. So if you look above the definition at figure 5.2, you can see a supply and demand curve there for tennis shoes. You can see you have an equilibrium price of $60 there. You have an equilibrium quantity of 90,000. Now let's go ahead and take a look at where you have a surplus. So actually any price above that equilibrium point is going to have a surplus. So let's look at $90. So at $90, you can see as you go to the right, you have 30,000 demanded, and that's at point A, and then at point B you have 150,000 supplied. So at $90 you have way more supplied than you have demanded, so therefore you have a surplus. Okay, when there is a surplus of something, there's too much of it out on the market, and that is naturally going to push prices down. It's going to push them down to equilibrium. So for number 4, when there's a surplus, what effect does this have on prices? It's going to go ahead and push those prices down back to equilibrium. Any point, any price above that market equilibrium is naturally going to go ahead and create a surplus situation, and it's going to push your price and quantity back down to equilibrium. All right, so now we're going on to number 5. When does a shortage exist? If you look on page 105, you can see the definition of a shortage. So a shortage exists when the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied at the price offered. So quantity demanded is going to exceed quantity supplied when you have a shortage of something. So let's go ahead and look again at figure 5.2. Let's look at a price of $30 there. So at $30, as you go across, you can see there's about 30,000 supply. There's about 150,000 demanded. So there's way more demanded than there is supplied. So therefore, you have a shortage. Okay, any price below that market equilibrium is going to have a shortage. And for number 6, when there's a shortage, which will push prices, it will naturally push them up. Okay, because there's not enough of something, it's naturally going to push up the price there. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here and go to 7. So let's go ahead and turn with me to page 106. And it says for number 7, what factors will shift the demand and supply curve? We already talked about this, but it's the determinants of demand and the determinants of supply. The determinants of demand and the determinants of supply are going to shift the demand as well as the supply curves. Now we're going to see what happens to market equilibrium when we go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at figure 5.3 on page 106. And let's go ahead and take a look at the graph to the left. So the graph to the left in figure 5.3 has the price per pair of tennis shoes and the quantity of tennis shoes in thousands. And the scenario that you have there is, let's say that tennis becomes more popular, so therefore the demand for tennis shoes increases. And what you have here is you have the demand curve shifting to the right from D1 to D2. Now, as you can see there, after the demand shift, your market equilibrium actually shifts. Okay, your original equilibrium E1, you're at $60 and you're at 90,000. After the demand shift, your equilibrium was $75 and 120,000. So equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity went up when you had that increase in demand. So you basically moved along the supply curve. When you had that increase in demand, price went up, equilibrium price went up, and equilibrium quantity went up as well. Now, if you go ahead and take a look at figure 5.3, the graph to the right. So there, we're going to have the scenario where there's better technology to make tennis shoes, and so that actually increases supply. So here you can see an increase in supply from S1 to S2, so the supply curve shifts to the right. Now you can also see there that the market equilibrium moved. So at E1, you had an equilibrium price of $60, you had an equilibrium quantity of 90,000. At E2, you had an equilibrium price of $45 and 120,000 was the quantity there. So as you moved from E1 to E2, price went down, equilibrium price went down, and equilibrium quantity went up. Okay, so for number 8, it says, what effect does a shift in a supply and demand curve have on market equilibrium? Moves it. It creates a new market equilibrium. All right, that will have and it will create a change in equilibrium price and it will create a change in equilibrium quantity. So I want to go ahead and show you on a supply and demand curve here kind of what happens. So right here we have a supply and demand curve, prices on our y-axis, quantity is on our x-axis. So let's say we have an increase in demand for something. Okay, the demand curve shifts to the right. You can see as we move from that equilibrium to that equilibrium, that price went up and then quantity went up. If you have a decrease in demand, the demand curve shifts to the left. We moved from that equilibrium to that equilibrium, so equilibrium price went down, equilibrium quantity also went down. Let's say we have an increase in supply. So we started off at equilibrium here, an increase in supply shifts the supply curve to the right. So we moved from that equilibrium to that equilibrium, that pushed down the price, and that pushed up the quantity. And the last scenario here, if we have a decrease in supply, the supply curve shifts to the left here. And you can see as we move from that equilibrium to that equilibrium, price went up, quantity went down. So those are the four possible scenarios. But no matter what, if you shift a demand or a supply curve, you're going to change your equilibrium price, and you're also going to go ahead and change your equilibrium quantity. Alright, so for number 9, it says show in graphical form the effects of a shifting demand and supply curves on market equilibrium. Basically, if you take down figure 5.3 with the increase in demand and the increase in supply, you should be good to go for number 9. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and check these tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you then. Have a good one. Bye-bye.